Aloha and welcome to E Hana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and we want to welcome you. Whether you're watching us from across the world or you're here in Hawaii, we're right now in downtown Honolulu at the Pacific Pioneer Plaza. My guest today is going to help us dive into an issue which is becoming more and more relevant with budgetary changes shifting on the federal level and trickling down or not trickling down in many cases to Hawaii. We're going to be talking about downsizing the U.S. military, but hold on for a second before you form any prejudiced idea about what that means, downsizing the military. Oftentimes we hear about that in terms of an ideology that would tell America to go home, but that's not the case. Today I have a true patriot, a United States Army colonel who has retired, who's served his nation for nearly 30 years, and is a valuable member of Makaha, part of our island community on Oahu on the west coast. He has some solutions in mind for this period of time in which we're going to see the downsizing of military resources here in Hawaii. And so I'd like to welcome to our program Colonel Al Frenzel. Al, welcome.
Well, thank you, Keli'i, for having me on the show.
Oh, delighted. In fact, you are a resident of the Makaha coast here on our islands. What took you out there?
Well, the beautiful beaches and people and frankly, the lower cost of living and
sure,
and expenses.
It's a great place. In fact, you don't get a lot of traffic because the island really ends there, doesn't it? We don't have a road through to the other side.
You're absolutely right.
So you must really enjoy that lifestyle.
It's excellent. The few times I have to come into town, though, that's a price I have to pay.
Well, in your career, no one needs to remind you of how important Senator Inouye was to the building up of Hawaii in terms of military, industrial issues. In particular, we have military bases here, and many of those assets because of Senator Inouye. Would you think he's an industry in and of itself?
He's an industry. You know, since the peace dividend of the 1989, most of your states and regions have downsized the military to some degree,
right,
slightly, even despite the Iraq War. But Hawaii has built up that entire time frame, and it's built up considerably over the 2000 and years, the 1990s. Senator Inouye was successful in bringing extra ships in. The Marines have increased in size. The shipyard is huge. But you know, he also brought in the Stryker Brigade, and that's one of the examples of bringing pork into the island that may have brought some payroll and some contractors, but it brought in a force that just is not functional.
Well, whether we like it or not, the fact is, under Senator Inouye, there was a tremendous up-ramping of federal resourcing here in the islands, and now we have some winds of change, wouldn't you say? In the passing away of Senator Inouye, the retirement of Senator Akaka, what do you anticipate because of that politically?
I would say we went totally from night and day. We went from the pipe was flowing full into Hawaii with federal monies, and not just for troops and,
sure,
and military units, but R&D, research and development, and studies. University of Hawaii has benefited a lot from federal monies coming in, all the result of Senator Inouye's power.
And now we move from having the most experienced, most powerful Senate delegation to well, really one of the least experienced and the least politically powerful. What does that say for the kinds of entitlements that can be expected to come to Hawaii?
Well, we've already seen them slow down, and we've seen that the Department of Defense has looked at where Hawaii fits into its budget scheme, and I think it's seen Hawaii as ripe for the taking.
Well, there's another issue as well, and that's the entire federal budget,
right,
and the deficit, the debt that we're facing and so forth, and the absence of growth in our cash sector. That means, basically in a nutshell, what does that mean for our military bases here in Hawaii?
Well, we're going to get into the Army's particular issue of the downsizing that's been mandated worldwide, and specifically on Oahu. But it's more than just that particular issue we'll get to in a second. It has to do with any of the basing or any of the modernization or equipment maintenance or facilities maintenance or new weapon systems that's decided, where they'll be positioned, how much money will be put towards that in the different states, is decided in the back rooms of Congress and in congressional hearings and all the power base within D.C. And so our junior freshmen or our freshman senators and congressmen are going to go there, and they're going to hit a vacuum of where will they be able, how will they be able to deal with the vacuum that Senator Inouye and
Sure.
Akina left behind.
So what I hear you saying is that the general order for downsizing has taken place, but the specifics haven't yet been decided, and so there's the wheeling and dealing in Washington, D.C. that determines which bases get closed, which are left open, which states are impacted the most, what alternatives there are. And what I hear you saying is that we don't really have much political clout up there.
No political clout, and the decisions are being made now as we speak. In fact, on the 26th of June, the United States Army notified through a environmental assessment the cuts that it's going to take among 19 states.
And today is August the 18th, 2014. So this is recent news.
This is 8 weeks ago, and in fact, even though they announced it into June, the word actually didn't get out until July. So this is something I've only been working on for 4 or 5 weeks. The impact, the effect of these, and the announcement of these shortages, and every 4 years, the Department of Defense has to publish what's called a quadrennial defense review.
All right.
And that's to provide direction to Department of Defense of where it's going to drive its strategy, and then therefore determine where its forces are and what kind of forces it needs. And it should be threat-based, but in actuality, the way things work, it's budget-based. So the budget is directing the Department of Defense take some cuts. The particular cuts that I want to talk about today that has the impact on Oahu is that the Army has been directed to cut from 550,000 soldiers to as low as 420,000.
Now, old school thinking, or at least traditional thinking up through Senator Inouye, would be, we've got to fight this. We've got to use political clout to make sure that doesn't happen, because that will impact the economy. But you're suggesting that old school thinking isn't going to work for us any longer, that we pretty much, I think you're saying, have to accept the fact that the cuts are going to come. So you're suggesting a different approach for our politicians.
Exactly. This is, if Senator Inouye is on board with us right now, I'm not even sure Hawaii would have been on the list. But Hawaii is one of 19 states identified for these cuts, and Hawaii has been earmarked for 16,000 loss at Schofield Barracks and 3,800 at Fort Shafter. That's 20,000 personnel. And while all the states are going to fight and say we got to have these troops, it's essential to our economy. In the particular case of Hawaii, I'm saying no, time out. For two reasons. One is they're not strategically located, and I can talk about that a little further why I believe that. But they're tying up other precious resources on Oahu that Hawaii could use, and I'm talking specifically the facilities and the buildings, the family housing, etc., the infrastructure that's at Schofield Barracks in Fort Shafter.
So what I hear you...
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
Wheeler Air Force
Right,
Base.
Wheeler, that's right, the barracks up
Yeah.
there. What I hear you saying is that it may not be the case that the best economic deal for Hawaii would be to keep these installations going with the personnel numbers, that there might be an alternative way to be able to use those resources, those bases that could benefit Hawaii economically. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, if people haven't been to Schofield Barracks recently in the last 20 years, or Fort Shafter for that, or excuse me, Wheeler Army Airfield for that matter, the building up there of family housing, the renovations and building of industrial facilities has been huge. And again, thanks to Senator Inouye. In fact, it was so huge that there's nothing else going on construction-wise. The construction boom is over. But all those facilities, for instance, the family housing, and the individual soldier quarters houses
Sure.
39,000 family members and soldiers. Imagine, and the impact of this cut of 20,000 affects 50,000 overall.
So these assets you're suggesting can be used in our state for a different purpose that actually benefits our economy and the people. We'll talk about that after we take a short break, but I want to ask you something really quickly. What about our preparedness in terms of national security? With the downsizing of the military, are we going to be impacting that, or is security accomplished through different means today?
Well, the national security strategy and national military strategy will still be accomplished with the forces that are remaining in the Pacific.
A leaner, more technological military.
Exactly. Plus, the Army on Oahu, and specifically Schofield Barracks, is isolated. They're isolated away from their cargo ships, and they're isolated from cargo aircraft. There are no aircraft, no ships on Hawaii to transport them. So, you know, Senator Inouye positioned a force here that we can't get anywhere. And so it's not strategic. It's not at the tip of the spear, as which the Army would like you to believe.
And what that suggests then is that the loss of numbers of troops is not going to in any way hinder or impair our national security here in Hawaii.
Absolutely not.
Well, I want to come back in just a moment here and discuss with our audience, with you and our audience, a remarkable proposal that you have been advocating, and that is, instead of fighting these cuts that will downsize our military bases here in Hawaii, accept them and propose an alternative. And don't go away, because you'll want to hear what Al Frenzel's alternative is. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute for ThinkTech Hawaii, the Ehana Kako broadcasting, well, show at least, and we'll be right back after this quick break.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Yamashita, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And urban transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Aloha and welcome back to Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Ehana Kako, it means let's work together. The alternative? Let's not work together, and we don't want that. Nothing takes place. I'm delighted today that here on ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network, we're able to preview, or actually able to feature a gentleman who has an innovative idea. What we do here at ThinkTech and at the Grassroots Institute is think, to create ideas, thought experiments, what if, and the grand what if today is, what if in the wake of the downsizing of the military and the military bases here in Hawaii, we stopped fighting that, but accepted that as an ultimate outcome and proposed an alternative. Here's a gentleman who has such an alternative, retired Army Colonel Al Frenzel. Al, welcome back to part two. Well, what is your solution?
Well, before I jump into that, I'd like to give some background on the military. We touched on it in the last session, but during the Cold War, the Department of Defense had the requirement to defend the nation and be able to operate in 2 major theater wars and a small-scale contingency, and that's what drove the budget. And then we had the peace dividend cuts in 1989, 1990, with a hiccup of the Iraq War getting in the way, but nevertheless, the defense, the national military strategy changed to supporting just 2 regional wars. Well, at the quadrennial review for 2014 that I mentioned, now has the military requirement to fight 1 regional war and 1 other small-scale contingency. So in the last 30 years, what I'm saying is that the military's mission is cut by 50%. So as a result of that, that's why the drastic cuts that have been announced recently, and particularly for the Army. There's budgetary impacts on the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines as well, but particularly for Oahu, what's important are these Army cuts.
And in terms of the Oahu and the Army is the branch of the military. Would I be wrong that to say that has the highest number of personnel with respect to the other branches?
It does, with the Marines and the Navy right behind, and then the Air Force. But the actual figure is about 24,000 Army members on Oahu. So, or, excuse me, 27,000 active duty soldiers on Oahu. So subtract what the Department of Defense is recommending of losing 19,800. It's a huge chunk. And what I'm asking personnel that may to think of a new paradigm. Think of a paradigm without the Army here. Think of a paradigm without spending all of our tax monies to have this force here that's isolated away from its ability to respond anywhere in the theater to a conflict, and consuming our precious tax dollars and the precious resources of the bases that they occupy. So what I'm asking Hawaii to do is embrace these cuts and, in fact, go to DOD, the Congress, and even President Obama, especially while he's still in office, and say Hawaii is one of the only states. The other 18 are going to fight like hell to keep these troops stationed there. We embrace these cuts, but we would like to have a financial transition assistance package during the 5 or 10 years that we go through the actual personnel cuts and then the base closures that would be a follow-on entity.
So you're suggesting then that there be an orderly plan for transitioning these assets that are left here, the bases, the real estate, the housing, and so forth, transitioning that to another entity. What entity would that be?
Well, by law, it has to be the state of Hawaii.
The state of Hawaii.
What the state does with it, or whether or not during the transition phase some other arrangements could be worked out to a privatization or to a Hawaiian entity. But the traditional and the by law method is to the state of Hawaii. And what we want to see is an orderly transition, not like Barber's Point transition was a horrible example, but one more like Fort Ord, the 7th Infantry Division in California, where Monterey, after the soldiers were downsized and the bases were cleaned up, which the Department of Defense has to do. That's part of the base realignment and closure procedures. They cleaned up the beaches where the Army would train and live fire. They transformed that base into a beautiful regional area supporting Monterey. And where the people in Monterey fought this, fought the downsizing. We can't afford to lose the 7th ID. It's going to affect us economically, and who's going to maintain all this property? They fought that, but once they finally gave up and the transition occurred, they're all very happy. I mean, it was an economic boom.
Well, earlier you used a term to describe this shift called a paradigm shift. And one of the rules in paradigm shifts is that while we're going through it, we really don't see the other side. The vast majority of people are fixated on the way things have been. And there's no question about it. We could go on throughout the rest of the show talking about what resistance there will be to downsizing the military and how strong the argument will be made that we're going to harm the economy of Hawaii. So I'm going to put that aside for a while because I'm very fascinated with what you are proposing. So let's go there now. Let's talk about this orderly transition over time of the assets from the federal government to the state government. What do you envision happening next?
Well, let's talk about the soldiers would attrit once approved if the cuts. It's not that they're not going to happen. The cuts are going to occur. The question is where in the United States are they going to occur? And whether we like it or not, the cuts are very likely to come to Hawaii because we don't have the political clout to defend it. But the soldier population and their families would attrit over a period of time in an orderly fashion, pretty much in line with when they would rotate out anyways. This has happened before. So you could see once a decision is made that the personnel would attrit out over the next 2 to 4 years or so. But then while that attrition is going on, there would need to be hearings with Congress and the state, what we call base realignment and closure procedures, and all the negotiations would occur on how the facilities that are left behind will be properly turned over. And what I'm proposing, what I'm saying is that the residual small amount at Schofield Barracks would need to be relocated to Fort Shafter, and you know, because they're losing 3,800 personnel, and that leaves Schofield Barracks and Wheeler Army Airfield with no soldier base and the ability to transfer all of those bases and installations and all their accoutrements. Basically, the two of them are a huge city in and of themselves to the state of Hawaii, and I also extending this to Makua Valley and Dillingham Military Reservation and the Keli'i access over the pass.
Incredible. Two cities, virtual cities, if you will,
Right.
Already built. Kind of like the promised people moving into the promised land in biblical times. There are these cities existing. When you say city, talk a little bit about Wheeler Air Force Base. What is up there? What is up there at Schofield? We've got barracks, we've got warehouses, we've got office buildings.
We have libraries, we have fire stations, we have post offices, we have...
How much housing is involved
there's
in the Army bases?
38,000 family members that live there. And their sponsors.
And these are in currently maintained units.
Exactly. And the Army overall has on Oahu about 7,000 family housing, and they report that they have 7,000, and this is in their own recent environmental assessment, that they have 7,000 individual soldier spaces. But nevertheless, 38,000 living on Schofield Barracks in Fort Shafter, or excuse me, I keep saying that, I apologize to the audience. Schofield Barracks and Wheeler Army Airfield, and then Shafter has its own little community as well.
So right now we're going through a period of time in which there is a shortage of affordable housing, which is one of the hottest political issues. We also have a homelessness problem and so forth. Do you see these facilities as being part of the potential solution?
That's exactly what I would love to see if I could, you know, be king for a day. Is I like to see the beneficiaries off the DHHL waiting list be given first opportunity for this housing. It's brand new housing. It's very well built housing. It's big housing. This is quality housing. But you know,
you're talking about homestead land. Department of Hawaiian Homelands, which has an obligation to provide housing for its beneficiaries, which it hasn't been doing to a high degree. Or you're saying open up these bases and let them become homes for Native Hawaiians? For
immediate occupancy. And how that's worked out, you know, as far as a lend lease or a sale, but some kind of low payment situation. But they wouldn't have to worry about this, you know, financing for building a home, which they do now. They have to qualify for a couple $100,000. I mean, you know those rules better than I do. But nevertheless, it is a financial hurdle for most of the people on the beneficiary list in which to ever acquire this land that they are on the waiting list for forever on. What I'm saying is, no, these houses are ready to move in. After the transition, obviously, of the soldiers off of Oahu, but the housing alone is worth $4 billion, and I give a value for the two bases up there, you know, by the Waianae Mountains of about $100 billion. So when you look at the value of those resources that are tied up right now with a force that doesn't need to be on Oahu, which is here as basically as a legacy of World War II. And also build up and increase in size because of the Inouye industrial complex, that we need to use these billions of dollars of assets, and the economic piece that you put aside is pale in comparison to putting that value to use for the state of Hawaii.
Well, I can imagine the possibilities are almost limitless. Everything from schools to universities to civic centers, as well as potentially, would you say, privatization of some of that?
Oh, it has to be, yeah. Sure.
And so we've got the private sector, we've got commercial enterprises being able to take advantage of this as well.
Exactly. And you know, when I go around and I talk about this issue, probably the biggest fear I get from people is we don't want another Barber's Point. So there will be needs to be some privatization, but we just need to manage it better than we did Barber's Point. And one of the reasons Barber's Point went so wrong is, first of all, there wasn't very good facilities. We didn't get much from that transition. The Navy knew for 15 years or more that it was going to lose this facility, so it didn't put any investments into it, didn't build any new buildings. When the few family houses and barracks that were there when they were transitioned over were virtually condemned as it was. So there were industrial facilities and a lot of land, but so I don't think Hawaii saw that as the opportunity that they would see Schofield Barracks.
And what you're suggesting then is that we approach these other facilities proactively, knowing that there will be a transition from, or hopefully, from federal government to the state, so that there are stakeholders right now who have an interest in keeping them maintained and not letting them sit and rot and dilapidate. Well, that's a very important part of this. When we come back after this short break, I want to play devil's advocate.
Okay, great.
I know I earlier was one of those people who raised the question of if the state can't manage Barbers Point, how in the world is it going to manage this transition? But I want to let you have an opportunity to respond to some questions. I'm Keli'i Akina, speaking with Al Frenzel, who has a creative solution as to what to do when military bases are going to be affected by the military downsizing and federal spending cuts. It's interesting, to say the least. We'll be right back on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network after this short break.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha and welcome back to Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I want to say thanks to Jay Fidel, our producer and founder of the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. You can find our work on thinktechhawaii.com, and you will know that every week we have about 20 to 25 hours of original content, exciting stuff. Thanks to you, Jay. Now, back to my guest. Al Frenzel, former United States Colonel in the Army, in the United States Army, who has a love of this country, but wants to see some good come out of the downsizing of the military here, and is proposing an alternative use for military assets to transition from the federal government to the state. Now, Al, let me ask you some tough questions.
I'm
play
ready.
the devil's advocate.
Please do.
First of all, I won't put it this way exactly. Who are you? But you know, on what? From what kind of background, what type of experience do you speak to this issue? What expertise do you bring to this solution?
In my last years of my career, I was fortunate to have not only attended the Army War College and done a research paper on the downsizing of the forces and recommending at that time a Cold War dividend cut of over 50%. So I researched it at that point in time, but I was lucky to have been kept on staff as faculty. And so for 2 years I was on faculty teaching, before retirement, teaching this very issue, and also leading, I was the lesson author for force structuring and led an exercise where our students, so Army War College students, full colonels, ready to go off and be more successful in their careers.
So you understand the logistical nuts and bolts of this kind of transition process and structuring.
I'm in a unique position to actually have some credibility in this area and interest. So when I saw the announcement, when it came to me about 5 weeks ago, I said, this is an area I have some expertise in. I need to weigh in on this issue.
How do you plan to go forward? As you acknowledged in a previous section of the show, there is a paradigm, there is a way of thinking, there is a mindset here. Part of that mindset has been top-down federal government to the state as being really our source of the funding that we need for our economy. It's part of a religious doctrine almost that the military presence here builds the economy, without which we're going to suffer tremendously. How are you going to promote your concept against such a mindset?
About 3 weeks ago, I started an organization which I'm inviting members to called the Oahu Council for Army Downsizing.
So you want to collaborate with other like-minded experts?
Exactly, and organizations, particularly organizations with clout and a voice in the community, so that we can coalesce into an action that can convince our young freshman legislators that to consider don't go the conventional status quo route, but consider the unconventional aspects of the goodness of the opportunity to receive Schofield Barracks and Wheeler.
Sure. Now, this is an election year. Have you had any good fortune or luck in being able to talk with some of the congressional or senatorial candidates and to get their feedback on and whether they would want to jockey this kind of idea?
I had a chance to speak to Senator,
one of them.
No, Mr. Iggy, David Iggy.
Okay.
I had a session with him.
All right, candidate for governor.
And what's interesting is when starting the conversation, I told him about the cuts, and of course he didn't know, because a separate issue is this issue is being kept really quiet in Hawaii. I don't know if the Star Advertiser has a kibosh on this issue until after the elections, but I will tell you this issue is above the front page above the fold on the mainland states that are vulnerable. But here in Hawaii, there was one article in June and back pages. So David Iggy didn't know about the cuts, and his first response was, "Oh no, we can't have that." And I said, well, no, time out, sir. Let me explain an unconventional approach to this. And I went through it similarly I did for you. And he stood back and said, well, there's some good points there. So, I didn't get a commitment from him, but I at least saw the light bulb go on.
So you're at the stage where you're trying to get the idea out, you're trying to put it before powerful policymakers, and you're bringing together collaborators in order to work through this. Let me ask you this. You did mention Barbara's point earlier, and yes, it has been a fiasco, the transition. You gave some good reasons as to why that was a setup in some ways, why we were not set up to succeed in the transition from federal to state. But at the same time, the state doesn't really have a great track record in managing real estate assets. Whether we're talking about existing entities such as the university or the West Oahu campus and so forth, or proposed entities like Kaka'ako and so forth, these are not only problematic politically in terms of just the administration. So what makes you think that the state of Hawaii will be able to do good with this rather than in some way
well, we're simply going to have to force the issue, and we're going to have to force the issue through a BRAC council. There'll be regardless of my particular council that I'm putting together, and regardless of the downsizing transition, there will have to be a federal BRAC council, and there'll have to be a local council of our community leaders and those that can contribute to this council to actually work with government for this transition.
One of the proposals you make is that Department of Hawaiian Homelands use some of the housing to house Native Hawaiians. But the problem, as Rob Perez of the Star Advertiser pointed out in several articles, is not the lack of land in the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, but a long history of mismanagement and corruption. So I'm not sure that's going to result in the kind of solution that you have in mind.
It might, because for one reason, the situation that the DHHL works with now is that they're dealing with raw land. And with raw land, you've got to transition from how do you qualify the beneficiary to be able to build on it. Does he have the income? Does he have the the credit history, etc.? Can he get the loan? In essence, and oh, by the way, it's as you mentioned earlier to me before the show, this leasehold situation. I'm suggesting that this is different in that the houses already exist, so you overcome a whole bunch of hurdles there, and you really get into assigning the asset instead of worrying about building it and that kind of thing.
Have you thought about this, bypassing the state of Hawaii? For example, when when federal agencies confiscate property, you can go down and bid on a boat or something like that. What if these federal properties were auctioned off to businesses, to families, to the private private parties rather than the state. I'm not really proposing that, but I'm just trying to suggest an alternative than having our state manage it. Have you thought about that? Is your vision open to that kind of proposal?
It is, but let me back up and say most of my focus right now is just getting the support, the community support and congressional support for the cuts.
Get the ball rolling.
Get the cuts. Once the cuts are approved for Hawaii, then we have, like I said before, 2 or 4 years, et cetera, to make the transition to what you're talking about is how are these assets actually used to the best benefit of Hawaiian people. And it'll be a combination of what you suggest. And I would like to see the housing handed off to beneficiaries. I'd like to see individual soldier-type quarters, barracks, etc., be provided to an entity to manage for the homeless. We could literally take all the homeless off our beaches and public areas. But then there's going to be facilities, industrial facilities, retail facilities, etc., that it can be a combination of state facilities, but generally speaking, turned over either lend-lease or as a fee simple sale to private industry. Imagine you mentioned the university up there. Imagine instead of West Oahu campus, which is barely even started yet. Imagine
it's Central Oahu.
Central Oahu, with the facilities already exist, a library, world-class classrooms, and
gymnasium.
Yeah, and
rifle range,
and access over Keli'i Pass, so the Leeward Coast can get there and North Shore can get there, and so it's centrally located.
Well, you've got a tall order, but a creative approach, and I think that this would be a great time during this political season to try to get this before candidates. It's not only the post-Inouye era, it is now the post-Abercrombie era. Right. And so there are people who are competing for the attention of the public, and one of the things that they may be looking for is policy that will really revolutionize the way we see things in Hawaii, solve some of our practical problems, fix the economy to some extent, give us that jolt that we need, and this certainly could do it if it comes through. Have you had any angels or any powers that be, other than David Ige's interest perhaps, come around you, other organizations, or are you at the very front end?
I'm at the front end. I have some traditional organizations from the sovereignty movement. I've got and others from peace-type situations, but I need more well-rounded organizations to join as well. But the point I'd like to make though is back to the political piece is our young delegates that'll go to U.S. Congress that are going to have to negotiate for these federal programs. As an example, if they can use this as a bargaining chip. They, for instance, they can say we sign up for the Army cuts, but they can coordinate with their constituents in the other states and say, but we want your support to Pearl Harbor, no changes to Hickam, no changes to Kaneohe Marine Base. They're going to have to give and take, and this is an opportunity to give. Right now, if they have nothing to negotiate, they don't have the Inouye power, but this could help get them in the door. If I was at Tulsi Gabbard, for instance, I would want to work with the senators in Washington State and say, I don't think you should lose your Stryker Brigade in Fort Lewis, Washington, where they have a training area. It's more appropriate for us, to lose it. But I'm not, and I'm willing to stand up for that. But I want some backup from you when it's time for discussions for Pearl Harbor, Kaneohe, or other federal programs.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see how our congressional and senatorial candidates respond to that suggestion of changing our role from being those who are fighting for a bigger slice of the pie to being those who are willing to give up that piece of the pie in order to get some bargaining chips. Right.
I'm trying to go to their campaigns. I'm working on their campaigns to get to their people, because if they do go and they fight to keep the Army here in Oahu, this is in their first terms. Most of them all first termers, right? And they fight and use all their political clout that they really don't have to keep them here, and they lose. and they come back to their constituents and say, I fought this really hard, but I lost, what's their chances of re-election?
Well, at the same time, they're dealing with that old adage that politics is perception. And right now the perception is we need a large military presence in Hawaii and the assets that come with that in order to fuel our economy. We don't have time on this show, but that's a proposition that really needs to be examined in and of itself, whether the presence of the military is as financially beneficial to the state as it has been in the past, and as we think. And I know that you've got some thoughts on that, but we've come to the end of our program. Let me give you 30 seconds to just say something to our audience out there. And
well, for those that want to know more about what I'm proposing, please go to www.oc4ad.com. You'll see not only the framework for this discussion, but another video presentation as well. But I'm looking for like-minded organizations to join and be part of this coalition of forces that is needed to convince our politicians to do the right thing.
Al, I want to thank you for being on our program
today.
Thank
you for having me.
Oh, delight. You've been listening to Colonel Al Frenzel, who has something that Hawaii is in great need of, and that is new ideas. And whether you agree with every aspect of his idea, I hope you appreciate the fact that he is thinking through and looking for new solutions to old problems. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, signing off today from E Hana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Aloha.